The letter trembled in her hands long before her heart did. Eleanor Whitmore stood at the edge of the dusty frontier town, her worn leather suitcase pressed against her ankle like an anchor, the last proof she hadn't imagined the journey. Around her, whispers moved faster than the prairie wind. Men paused mid-step. Women glanced, then looked away. Everyone knew why she was here. A mail-order bride. Another desperate woman sent west with hope folded into ink and promises. And now, another one no one wanted. The first man had barely looked at her before shaking his head. "Too thin," he muttered as if she were livestock. The second laughed nervously and said he'd already changed his mind. The third never even showed. Each rejection landed like a quiet slap, not loud enough to protest, but sharp enough to sting. Eleanor swallowed it all, lifting her chin, refusing to cry where strangers could see her break. She was about to turn back toward the boarding house when the children appeared. Two of them, twins, bundled in matching wool coats and knitted caps. Their small hands clutched tight around a man's black gloves. The cowboy holding them didn't rush. He stood still, as if time moved differently around him, tall, broad-shouldered, weathered by sun and loss. His eyes, dark and steady, rested on Eleanor not with judgment but recognition. People murmured behind him, "Widower, rancher, trouble, 3 years alone." No woman had lasted. No woman had tried. Eleanor felt suddenly small. The cowboy stepped forward, boots crunching softly against dirt, the twins shifting in his arms. One child reached out instinctively, fingers stretching toward Eleanor's dress. She froze. The town held its breath. "You're Eleanor," the man said, voice low and even. She nodded. "I'm Thomas Hale." Silence pressed in, thick as fog. Eleanor braced herself for another polite refusal. Another reason she wasn't enough. But instead Thomas knelt, right there in the dirt. The town gasped. He adjusted his hold on the children, then looked up at her. Not like a man choosing a bride, but like someone asking for mercy. "They lost their mother," he said quietly. "I lost my wife, and I won't pretend I know how to fix either." Eleanor's throat tightened. "I don't need perfect," Thomas continued. "I need someone kind. Someone who stays, someone who'll teach them how to laugh again." Then so softly only she could hear it, he whispered, "Be the mother of my children." Something in Eleanor cracked open, not from pain, but from being seen. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the twins. One smiled. The other leaned against her skirt as if it were already decided. Behind them, the town watched, waiting for her to fail, waiting for her to run. Eleanor picked up her suitcase and followed him home. Life on Thomas Hale's ranch was not gentle. The mornings came early. The winters came hard, and grief lived in the walls like an old ghost that didn't leave just because someone new arrived. Eleanor learned quickly that loving a broken family meant earning trust inch by inch. The twins tested her without meaning to. Nightmares, silence, sudden tears. Eleanor never forced them to call her anything. She never tried to replace what was lost. She simply stayed, every morning, every meal, every scraped knee and whispered fear. Thomas watched from a distance at first. He worked longer hours, spoke less. But slowly things changed. Laughter returned, hesitant then real. The house warmed. The children began to run to Eleanor instead of past her. One night, a storm tore across the plains. Thunder shook the windows. The twins cried out. Eleanor gathered them close, rocking them by firelight. Thomas stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his coat, and saw something he hadn't seen in years. Peace. Later, when the children slept, Thomas spoke. "I didn't bring you here to save us," he said. "But you did." Eleanor shook her head. "You saved me first." Spring came. So did whispers. The town that once rejected her now watched in disbelief as the ranch thrived, not just in cattle and crops, but in life. Eleanor stood taller. Thomas smiled easier. The twins grew louder, braver, happier. And one evening, under a sky painted gold, Thomas reached for her hand, not in desperation this time, but certainty. "I asked you once," he said, "to be the mother of my children." Eleanor met his eyes, steady and sure. "And now?" she asked. "Now," he said softly, "I'm asking you to be my wife." She said yes. Because love didn't arrive for Eleanor in grand promises or perfect timing. It arrived in a quiet whisper, in children who needed her, in a man who knelt not to claim her, but to choose her. The wedding was small, the way most meaningful things are when they're meant to last. No grand church bells, no silk gowns shipped from the east. Just a clear prairie morning, a borrowed white dress that Eleanor had stitched herself late into the night, and a circle of people who had once doubted her, but now stood quietly, humbled by what they'd witnessed over time. The twins clutched flowers too big for their hands, their laughter carrying farther than any music could. When Eleanor walked toward Thomas, the ground beneath her felt steady, like it finally knew her name. But love, Eleanor soon learned, does not end with vows. It begins there. Marriage did not erase hardship. The ranch still demanded blood and sweat. Winter returned with its sharp teeth, and the town, though softened, did not forget easily. Some women smiled politely but whispered behind her back. Some men still spoke of mail-order brides as if they were goods bought and sold. Eleanor heard it all. She always did. But she no longer carried the weight alone. The true test came when sickness swept through the valley. It started with a cough in one of the twins, then fever, then another child from a neighboring ranch fell ill. Panic spread faster than the illness itself. Doctors were days away. Roads were buried under snow. Thomas rode out anyway, determined to find help, leaving Eleanor behind with trembling children and a house full of fear. That night, Eleanor sat by the fire with cool cloths and whispered prayers. She remembered her own childhood, how no one had stayed when things grew hard, how rejection had followed her like a shadow, and she realized something powerful in the quiet of that moment. She was no longer the woman who had arrived with a suitcase and a letter. She was the woman who stayed. When dawn broke, the fever finally eased. The twins slept peacefully for the first time in days. Eleanor collapsed into a chair, exhausted, hands shaking, heart full. When Thomas returned, frozen, desperate, expecting the worst, he found his children alive, smiling weakly, and Eleanor standing between them and the world like a wall built of love. He said nothing at first. He simply held her. Word spread. The same town that once rejected her now knocked on her door asking for advice, for remedies, for comfort. Eleanor gave it freely, not to prove anything, but because kindness, once rooted, grows without permission. Years passed. The twins grew tall, strong, curious. They called her Ma without thinking, without ceremony, as if she had always been. Thomas watched her in the fields, in the kitchen, in moments of quiet strength, and knew something most men never understand, that choosing love again after loss is the bravest act of all. On one warm evening, long after the stars had risen, Eleanor stood on the porch holding a letter. Thomas recognized the handwriting immediately. Another mail-order bride. Another woman standing where Eleanor once stood. "What will you do?" Thomas asked gently. Eleanor folded the letter with care. "I'll write back," she said, "and I'll tell her the truth." "And what's that?" "That rejection doesn't mean the end," Eleanor replied.